What's up, fellow investors? I'm Matt. In this video, I'm going to walk through my stock analysis of the database software company MongoDB, ticker symbol MDB. On this channel, my goal is to log my journey to financial freedom by sharing my portfolio and show how I'm doing this through disciplined saving and smart investing. MongoDB is a hyper-growth company. With its software, it's on the cutting edge of big data, machine learning, and database cloud management. That's a lot to unpack, so let's dive right in. With any investment, it's so important to understand the industry that your business is in and how your company fits into the competitive landscape right now. With MongoDB, this means that we need to have an understanding of the database industry and the difference between relational databases and non-relational databases. MongoDB is a document-based non-relational database, and I put together a quick example to show how relational databases work and how MongoDB's non-relational database works. And after this, it'll be easy to see why a lot of modern applications are turning to non-relational databases like MongoDB for their applications.
So relational databases are fairly easy to understand because they're set up pretty similar to spreadsheets, basically. So for this example, let's assume I own an online store. And one of the first things I want to do is I want to record basically who's purchasing my products. So the first table I'm going to set up is going to be to record my customers. So as you can see in this table, I'm recording my customer's name, address, phone number, and date of birth. And I'm giving each of those a unique ID to serve as a reference to use later. Now in a separate table, I want to record what products my customers are purchasing. So in this purchase products table, I'm recording the product, the dollar amount they spent, and the location. And as you can see, I'm not duplicating the information for the customer. I'm inputting their unique ID instead of their full name and all that information. And I'm also giving each of my purchase products another unique ID to serve as a reference in case I need to use that in any other table. So for the first row of data in the purchase products table, I can see that a light bulb was purchased for $3 in Los Angeles, and with this customer ID of 1, I can now relate in this table that customer was John Smith, and I have all his relevant information in this table. So everything is going to be linked from a database perspective. Non-relational databases are sometimes called NoSQL databases as well, but MongoDB is a document database structure. So this basically means that all of its information is going to be stored in documents. So let's try to replicate our store by using the structure that MongoDB outlines. So in this first document, I'm going to be pulling up a customer, John Smith. So on the first row, you can see that this name is similar to basically the columns that I set up in my tables previously, but for the document-based system, I'm going to repeat these keys in each of my documents. So each of my documents is basically going to say, hey, this is the information that I have for this customer, John Smith, when it comes to customers. So in the second document, notice that I'm repeating basically, okay, I'm recording name, address, phone number, date of birth. It's not going to be like the relational database where I just have one column and all the data is falling into that column. Each of these documents is going to express what it's recording through this format. So now let's look at how I would record a purchase product in this type of database. So in this document, I'm recording the purchase of a light bulb for $3. It was purchased in Los Angeles, and it was purchased by James Thomas. This is his address, phone number, and date of birth. So notice how in this database, I'm explicitly writing down basically everything I want to know about this purchase of product. So I am copying all the information about the customer that I want to know that can be found in this document. So I'm duplicating this information here. This is obviously going to be inefficient when it comes to storage because I'm duplicating all the information about the customer in this document, and I'm also recording it in this one as well. But doing this is going to have its own advantages, which we can start to look at. So very easy to see, but the first advantage is going to be that this database structure is going to be very well suited for big data because it's very adaptable. It's going to be really easy for me to start just adding any sort of information that I want to start recording because it's just going to simply add another field and value to each of these documents in the process. and I don't have to worry about changing anything in the way that the database is set up because I'm storing all the information in these documents. And it's just going to be really easy for me to start recording any type of information that I want to record without any disruptions to the application. And the second big advantage is it's going to be very easy for me to scale this database to multiple servers or multiple computers. And I do not need to worry about setting up the database and telling what type of information it's going to get. I just needed to hold these text documents with whatever information the application wants it to hold. And the third advantage is going to be that this is going to run much faster with large data. And this is going to be because any request from the application, I can really store all the information in a single document. Just by the fact that, this type of database is really just going to be looking for one document with any request from the application, rather than having to go through 10 different tables that have, maybe 10 million rows in each of them. It's going to be a lot faster with providing data or providing whatever request the application is doing to the end user. And the fourth big advantage is going to be that you're going to have a lot better uptime in terms of your applications, because I don't need to worry about changing the database structure on the back end to record new data. And also, just to have a backup of my data, it's going to be really easy because I just need a copy of all these documents somewhere. And so there's going to be no worry about downtime or availability of information for requests from the application.
Now, it's easy to see by walking through this example. A lot of large applications are just finding use cases where a non-relational database like MongoDB is simply going to be faster, easier to maintain, and easier to scale with large user bases that are growing.
And if you go to databaseengines.com, this is a site that ranks the popularity of databases. And as you can see, MongoDB is number 5 on this list with a score of 462. And it's also one of the fastest growing databases in the top 15 right now. In March, it grew 24 points with the metric that Database Engines uses. And if you look at the top 10, not only are most of them relational, but MongoDB is the most popular non-relational type database out there on the market. And that's because it has a really good name with the developer community. But when you think of document-based, non-relational, NoSQL databases, it's MongoDB.
Now, there will always be use cases for both relational and non-relational databases, but because of the advantages that MongoDB has, a lot of applications are turning to MongoDB as they're being onboarded onto cloud, or if new applications are being made on cloud already, then a lot of them are turning to MongoDB as their database of choice. MongoDB's flagship product or service is going to be its database as a service called Atlas. Atlas is really useful to companies with large applications because it allows them to take this application and be able to host it on Google Cloud, Microsoft's Azure, or Amazon's AWS pretty seamlessly and use the same database structure throughout all those different cloud providers. The management team highlights this strategy as its run anywhere strategy because it wants its customers with their applications to be able to not be prohibited to any one of the cloud storage providers. So through MongoDB, they're able to use them all. So now that we have a good understanding of the business and the industry that MongoDB is in, let's start to shift to the fundamentals.
So if we shift to MongoDB's revenue, it's been a company that's been growing really fast over the last 6 years. In 2015, MongoDB's revenue was about $65 million, and now in 2020, its revenue is at $590 million, it's had a lot of impressive growth from 2015 to 2021. In its most recent quarter, MongoDB grew by 40%, and it does look like MongoDB is going to be able to keep up this growth because a lot of applications and companies are turning to MongoDB when they're moving their applications to cloud, which below MongoDB does not report on their revenue for Atlas specifically. What I had to do is I had to take the percentage of the revenue, which the management team includes in their discussion in each of their annual reports. So in just 4 years, you can see that in 2017, MongoDB Atlas's revenue was just $11 million, while its total revenue was $166 million. So that's under 10%. And now in 2021, MongoDB Atlas looks to be around 50% of MongoDB's revenue. So this is a very promising, this is going to be its driver for growth in the future. And I think this is going to continue to grow at impressive rates. Now, since MongoDB is in this hyper growth mode and they're really disrupting, they're trying to take market share from legacy database companies. So they are not focused on profits right now. They are losing money. But this makes it even more important for us as an investor to look into its balance sheet and cash flows to make sure that they're going to be positioned well enough to grow quickly before they need to turn out profits. So the first thing that I want to look at when pulling up MongoDB's balance sheet is I want to take a look at its total current assets versus its total current liabilities to see how it's able to meet its short-term obligations as a company. So if we look at its total current assets, it's currently sitting on $1.1 billion in current assets, which is really good. That's a very healthy amount. Most of that's coming from cash, which has about $429 million in cash, which is very good. And it also has $528 million in short-term investments, which are probably going to be like treasuries or really safe investments. So it's essentially cash, but it wants to get a little bit of return on the large amount of money. And if we look at its total current liabilities is $354 million, which is, it's much less than its total current assets, which is good. And if I look into its total current liability section, I see that $221 million is coming from deferred revenue. This is really just the dollar amount associated with the service that it's going to fulfill for its customers. So it's not a true cash out of hand liability. So now if I go to its total liabilities, I can see that MongoDB has $937 million in convertible senior notes, which is a form of debt, basically where the owner of that debt has the option to turn it into shares if MongoDB's share price hits a certain price. So this is still going to be considered debt because you still need to pay down the debt, or it's going to result in a lot of dilution with shares because they're going to be converting it into stock. So this is a pretty large amount for MongoDB's size. That's about a debt to asset ratio of about 0.67, which is quite high. However, it looks like MongoDB is getting to the point where it has a lot of cash on hand, and depending on how much cash it's burning each year, this might not be an issue now if it's able to sustain its impressive growth. But now I want to dive into MongoDB's cash flow statement because I want to see how much cash it's actually burning each year to get an idea of its run rate. So at the top of the cash flow statement for 2021, I can see that we're pulling in its net loss from its income statement of $266 million, which is what we discussed on the revenue slide. Now if we get into, the real meat of the cash flow statement in terms of its operating activities, we can see that it has a lot of non-cash expenses that it's recording in that loss. So depreciation, amortization of debt, or any of the other things, those are all going to be non-cash expenses. And then also it looks like it's issuing a large amount of stock. So it has a lot of stock-based compensation. Its stock-based compensation is about $149 million. So that's going to be good in the sense that it's not going to... We're not in a cash crunch right now because I'm adding all those up, and the non-cash expenses with the stock-based compensation, that's about somewhere around $220 million. And if we look at the total net cash used in operating activities, so this is really the loss from actually operating the company, it does come out to about negative $42 million. So really those top categories is really the gap between the actual net loss from the income statement to the actual cash that left the company to operate. So now let's look at the cash flow from investing and cash flow from financing. So in the cash flow from investing, we can see that basically they received $740 million from its investing activities. So that's going to be like the short-term investments like you saw on the balance sheet. And then it invested $990 million into short-term investments. So this is a net decrease of $262 million in cash. This isn't a problem. It's basically just putting more cash in investments to get a return on it. So now let's look at the cash flows from financing activities. This is going to let us know if the company is raising capital through debt or issuing out more stock. So it looks like MongoDB raised a little bit amount of money, $27 million, And this is mostly coming from basically an employee stock purchase plan that it has and stock options that were exercised during the last year. So MongoDB's run rate is very reasonable when you look at how much cash is actually flowing out of the company to operate and its current cash position. However, it is diluting a lot of shares. So now let's see what the share dilution has been like for MongoDB for the past couple years. So this is a chart that shows MongoDB's outstanding shares from 2017 to 2020. It looks like MongoDB's outstanding shares in 2017 were about 50 million, and in 2020 they're now 60 million. So that's about 10 million shares it's issued over the past 4 years. This leads to about a compounded 6% dilution in terms of the value of your share. So if MongoDB is able to continue growing at its current rates, I do not think this is going to be a problem. So this is important to keep in the back of your mind, but it also shows you how important it is for MongoDB to continue growing.
So it's probably easy to tell, but I do think MongoDB is a very impressive company. It's in a very good industry and has a very good competitive advantage over its peers. I am an investor and own shares in MongoDB, so let's get into my positions.
So here's my current position in MongoDB. I currently own 24 shares, and I should also say that I am engaged, and this was actually a stock that my fiance found. So our first investment in MongoDB was in 2018, and we invested $490. Man, I wish we made more money and invested more in MongoDB at that time, but the past is the past. So our position from then is up about 333%. So this is a position that's currently about 2.5% of my total portfolio. So off of my 24 shares, my total gain is about $1,945. Most of it coming from my first purchase in 2018. And so my total gain and loss on this stock right now is about 43%. This is a stock that has received a pretty big haircut recently in terms of price. So I am starting to look at it again because it's starting to pull back to my cost basis that I bought it at in last year, 2020. So here is a daily chart of MongoDB. If we look at it, looks like it peaked around $420 in February, and it's about 37, just shy of 40% off of its high. So that's a pretty big pullback in terms of percentages. However, I do think there was a lot of speculating activity going on from the end of December to February. So it was definitely overpriced in this range. And even basically back in 2020 when I was buying it kind of over in this range, I still thought it was expensive, and I really wasn't expecting it to move up again. I was kind of hoping it would go sideways for a long time and I could continue to accumulate those prices while its price to sales and ratios were being digested a bit. But if we look at the past couple months price action, it dropped pretty steeply from its highs. It fell briefly into this kind of bearish flag pattern for a little bit. So it dropped from 400, fell down to its 200 moving average. It looked like it bounced around in this area a bit more. And now it's completing this pattern, and it's trying to find where its bottom is going to be. Typically, I like to assume the market is going to be somewhat symmetrical. So let's see. If MongoDB dropped from 400 to 290, I'm thinking that this next leg down is also going to be pretty steep. So from 330 to, I'm thinking it's going to be below this. I'm trying to see if MongoDB is going to drop below this 250 to 220. I think it's going to receive a bounce somewhere in that range. I don't know if that's going to be the bottom. I mean, this thing could easily blow through it, but I'm hoping that MongoDB is able to fall below and I can get a price below 250. So if it falls below 250, I'm probably going to be looking to purchase a little bit of MongoDB again. However, so if we look at its price to sales over the last couple years, it's easy to see that MongoDB kind of typically trades, even if we go back a little farther, MongoDB typically trades between this 30 and 20 range in terms of its price to sales. So, looking at its price to sales, it's definitely to see that it was expensive over the last couple months. But now that it's falling in this range, I'm hoping if it falls below a price to sales of 25 and I can kind of get it, closer to this valuation, then I'll definitely be happy to pick up some more shares of MongoDB because I am a big believer in its growth story. So this is a company I'm going to continue to hold on to, and it's one on my watch list. I'm seeing I want to see if it pulls back even more to levels where it starts to become really appealing for me to add to my position.
If you're interested in other analyses I've done on stocks, I recently did analysis on Home Depot, which I'll post a link to here. That stock has popped about 20% in the last couple of weeks, so definitely that's a good one to keep on your radar if it pulls back. If you're interested in another growth company I've done an analysis on, I did one on Splunk, and I'll post the link to that video here. That's another company that's pulled back tremendously from its peak, and I think that it also has a very good growth story going forward with the potential to be very profitable. This is Market Matt, and I wish everybody good luck when it comes to investing.